You're the reason why I am my way. You're the reason why I rip my shirts, why I eat at the buffet. Butter, you got your very own kind of nice. We all live inside a butter world. Oh, butter, butter, gonna eat it by the stick tonight. Gonna eat out this world. Oh, butter, I'm about to take a bite, 'cause I want that salty cream. What I dream about all night. Butter dreaming. I'm about to take a bite, 'cause I want that salty cream. What I dream about all.
All right, welcome everyone.
Yo.
Howdy.
Welcome to an episode with Butterfield. I'm Jay. My brother Anderson is joining us, and we have a great guest, Future 4200. 4200 or 4200?
I think most people say 4200.
Nice. Got it right.
What
the
do you
first
think? Yeah.
Yeah.
I like to use my first name, Dustin, but on the internet,
Dustin.
I don't really like say the words on the internet. So in real life, hey, real quick, I'm getting like a super echo in here.
Oh, really?
Yeah, are neither of you guys hearing that?
No.
Hold on. It wasn't.
Do you have the YouTube link open?
Oh yeah, I bet you that's what it is.
Yeah. Is it so future 4200, 42000?
It's 420 times 10.
Yeah.
Yeah, Future 420 was gone, was like already taken, so I had to stick with that one. Yeah, that's I had the YouTube.
Yeah. It's a badass name, and it's a badass picture you have on your Instagram.
Oh yeah.
Thanks.
Of
The
Back to the
Doc
Future.
Brown. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a clever idea one day. Hey, is it you guys singing the intro song on this?
No.
No.
I was gonna say it's a sick song.
Yeah. So it's Rolling Blue, right, Anderson?
Yeah, Rolling Blue. Shout out Rolling Blue.
Rolling
track.
Blue. So he has this TikTok video or Instagram video, and he's like, singing about butter, but he's actually like kind of blaming butter because he's fat.
Oh, I see. You go up to this song. How does he feel about that?
Yeah, he knows. We asked him for permissions, and he's like, "Oh yeah, that's cool. That's cool." I don't think he knows what we're about.
That you're the opposite of Hey, buddy, it's not the butter making you fat.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a great cover. But yeah, Dustin, thank you so much for making the time to talk to us, man. We've been going back and forth on Instagram for a while, and we've been following your stuff for a while. Me and your brother are big fans of your work, and kind of like just your whole message, man. We talk about it all the time. When are we gonna get a piece of land and start raising some cattle of our own? Like with the way things are headed right now, it just kind of seems like the right next step. Food security and all, and whatever they're doing to the food, you don't really know. And the best way you can know is you're either getting it straight from the farmer or you're taking the means within your hands. And that's what you've done, man. Like you're living what we talk about all the time. So, we're just really looking forward to this conversation, picking your brain and learning about what it really is you're about, man. Because, I get some anarchist vibes from you.
All goes together. You can't be a good anarchist if you can't take care of yourself, especially, not now. Maybe in a couple generations when there's a lot more anarchists and community and stuff. But right now, you're an anarchist. If you truly want to be an anarchist, you've got to unplug quite a bit, and that means being super resilient.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course we mean anarchist in that sense, right? We don't mean like what people usually think of.
No,
Like
people, that word is
crazy guy.
Yeah, absolutely. That word's definitely been co-opted. I'm a true like non-violent anarchist where I don't believe that any human has the right to use violence over any other human to force them to do something. And that includes the government forcing you to do things with their violence.
Yeah, yeah, precisely.
Yeah, I think I'm a strong proponent of like voluntary collectivism. Like we can choose to work together or we can choose to, not associate at all, but you leave me alone, I'll leave you alone. And if we all had like a basis of like a permaculture ethics basis for all of our decisions, then you get away from a lot of the issues. Like people always say, well, who's going to control the guy polluting the river? Well, why are people polluting the river? And is there other alternatives to whatever it is that they're doing that doesn't have to pollute the river? Like it's just because they're producing plastic. Well, let's collectively figure out a world that doesn't need plastic. What are we talking about here? And I think if we had true, unregulated free market capitalism, that cream would rise to the top. But then here comes the government, and when you have this issue with the corporations can just purchase regulations from the government to put out the small guy or the collectives so that you're forced to buy their slop and they're the only option. And that applies to food, to pharmaceuticals, to transportation, to everything, right? We have this country is just as corrupt as every other country. It just, they made the corruption legal and they called it lobbying, insider trading. But that's only illegal for you and me, not for the government. They can insider trade all they want. They made the law. Of course they made the law so that they could insider trade and we couldn't. Duh.
Yeah. And there's just like something that's very special to the U.S. is just how there's just a lot of everything. Right, there's like an abundant access of just material things, and so with corruption and with like stealing, they're just like they're skimming off the top of things, but it's just enough so that people don't realize, because of course they're also living in excess. Whereas like somewhere where I'm at right now, El Salvador, like it's pretty clear, there's lots of poverty and like inequality around here, and every government, every political party that comes into place is just inherently corrupt, right? It's just a matter of seeing who can funnel more funds away from the government.
Yeah, from the people.
From the people, right? But I like what you said there. If everyone had an ethics system based on permaculture.
Right.
Could you tell us a bit about that? Like what you mean by that?
Yeah. So the core tenets of permaculture, which is just a design science, the base principles are that you need to take care of people, you need to take care of the earth, and then if you do those first two things, you're likely to obtain an abundance, and to make sure you put enough of that abundance back into those first two things to continue to generate an abundance. That applies really well to like agriculture, but it really is a design science for all things in life. And the whole design science revolves around identifying successful natural patterns and then replicating those out into different systems. And so if we can take those ethics and then that general understanding and apply it out to lots of things, like to be the most successful capitalist in a transparent free market, I'm the guy that's taking care of everybody. If you're getting over on somebody and we're, in the modern world and it's transparent and we have unfettered access to compete freely, the people that take care of the most people, they're going to win. Like why would anybody choose a company that takes advantage of people if they're fully aware of it? And there's a suitable option that doesn't do that. So like, permaculture, by basing my businesses around this permaculture ethics, they've all become significantly more successful. And you can see that, like you hear it, the customer's always right is like you're taking care of the people, but the customer is not always right if it means sacrificing, the care of the earth. Like the customer is not right that they want plastic for as cheap as possible, so you pollute the river in effort to get that. You can't have that. That's not that system. If we had free, true free markets where people could then go in and compete, they'd say, look, well, I can offer not the cheapest price, but it doesn't kill the river, what I'm doing, and that's going to be much better for you down the long run because of all the unintended consequences that come from ruining the river. Like, yeah, you got cheap plastic, but your food's 10x because we have no more sea life to feed you with. So now you're eating algae and it costs a lot to grow. So, you know, if we can look at like long-term consequences, we can say, hey, look, maybe this hemp-derived package material or whatever is better for the earth. It may cost a little bit more right now, but if we switch over to this in the future, here's how we could get it down, the cost down if everybody's doing it was at that scale. And by the way, you know, no dead oceans. And it's just apply that to anything. But we run into this problem where you go and try to do something like that, and you find out that it's all stacked against you regulatory wise because those big plastic companies in this example have paid the government specifically to write laws that they have to abide by, but it doesn't matter. They can afford to abide by them, but those laws make it prohibitively, you know, like it's not possible for you or I to go in and start competing because to just surmount the regulations is huge. Joel Salatin wrote a book, Everything I Want to Do is Illegal. This problem in agriculture in the United States is massive. If you want to be a small scale producer and sell to people, it's getting better because of men like Joel Salatin and books and this us talking to each other. You know, that's the power that we have in the United States, is that if enough people get on the same page, we can influence our government. They can't fight the wave. Like, they'll try to push the wave back and they'll stay, but once the tides turn, they usually just turn and go with it. Otherwise, they risk, you know, us overthrowing them. Maybe we'll see. I feel like the last couple of years was a big test of that. But in agriculture, it's incredible. Like the whole meat packing industry is a perfect example. 150 years ago, yeah, it was terrible conditions and there was child labor. There's all these issues because there was zero transparency. You had like, you know, a newspaper that was controlled by this, and that was it. That was how people like knew what was going on. They were riding horses around. Now you got a guy with a cell phone in the factory, and if shit's getting, if there's kids working in the factory, you'd be exposed in a second. Some dude with a cell phone to pop up and show the child labor at your meat packer. Like, no way. So through transparency, we don't need all of these regulations that came about to keep people safe, right? I, as the consumer, should be able to go to the rancher and buy steaks from him. It's insane that I can't without it going through a huge USDA, process. Now, I, as a consumer, go buy steaks at the grocery store. I still feel like I should be able to make option as a consenting adult to buy the unregulated beef. Like, hey, you know, prominently marked, this steak did not go through the USDA. It's 20-30% cheaper because they didn't have to have that USDA bullshit stamp on it. Like, for me, the butcher that I use, they take my cow, they cut and wrap it, they put a big stamp, not for resale, and comes back to me. It costs $2 a pound cheaper than if they put the stamp on it that said USDA certified. Same exact butcher, the only step where the process is different is that for my cow to get USDA certified butchered, I have to send it to their lot alive, and it has to stand there for 1 day, and then they slaughter it there, and then it goes to the butcher. Instead, what I do is I have a mobile truck come do it here, so my animal's not stressed out. It's in the same spot it's always been its whole life. It's not getting on a truck the day before it dies. It's never been on a truck before. And so that's the only step difference. And the cost is almost entirely for my butcher regulatory. It's that $2 a pound more is what they're basically paying the USDA for all of that. It's insane. So I should be able to have that choice all the way through the line of consumption, whether I'm buying it from the farmer, at the grocery store, at the restaurant, to opt out of the USDA certification. And then, you know, people can tell me I'm crazy if they want, but that's my choice. I'm also not supposed to eat raw eggs, and you know, there's lots of things that the government says is going to kill me. That's the freaking opposite. Like, it made sense why these things came about sometimes, why these regulations. But, you know, you read Upton Sinclair and you start reading about the history of all these regulations, and you realize that the big meat packing industry, yes, they were profiting off of child labor, but when the news kind of came out, they rode the wave too. They're like, oh, you're right. You know, this is actually crazy. Let us change. We're so sorry. We'll help implement all these rules to make sure that this never happens again. And those rules automatically set them up to, you know, monopolize these industries. And it's the same story for every big industry in this country.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's interesting what you said about Joe Salatin saying, oh, everything I want to do is illegal. It's like we've had these answers before, and now we're like rediscovering these answers, and because the government already covered it ahead of time, it's illegal to to do all these things, even something as simple as like eating unregulated beef, which sounds
Yes.
it sounds pretty simple, but it's insane that you don't have that free will, right? I guess, would that be infringement on someone's free will?
It's that classic quote, if you give up security or if you give up freedom for security, you end up with neither, right? And that's what it is. You've given up a little bit of freedom for this sense of security that the USDA was involved and made sure everything was legit. And like I said, in some sense, that's true. Like, you can't be in this like bacteria-ridden, nasty little hobbit hole cutting up roadkill, serving it to people like canned, right? Like, the USDA is like, nah, not gonna fly. So for that, but and then the like them not labeling that as something that it's not, like, they're not selling me premium jerky saying it's beef or bison, and really it's like possum, again, roadkill possum. Like, so there's that. There, in that sense, like, yes, I'm happy with USDA, but again, I should be able to go directly to the guy where it came from and buy it from him legally. It's insane that I can't. I'm standing right there. I'm looking at it. I don't need the government to tell me what is or isn't when I'm standing there looking at exactly what it is. Get out of here.
Yeah. So you're saying, like, the consumer should be able to just, verify that process for themselves, rather than having some like abstract agency come and put their seal on it, where you're losing any insight into that process at all.
Right.
Yeah.
And if we look at, the government has a terrible track record of being good at what they do. Like, most likely all the shit that they're saying is the opposite, like we said. So how am I supposed to trust, when the majority of their agencies just spew lies? How are we supposed to pick and choose which ones we decide aren't lying? It's insane.
Yeah.
That's true. That's true.
How deep do the lies go, right?
Endless. Every stone you turn over, it's just bunch of lies, and it's like we're on this like 30-year delay, 40-year delay, where they're like, well, everything that year was pretty much a lie, but we just are now finding out about all the other parts that we thought were true, but were actually lies. It's endless.
Yeah, and the worst part is, they come up with, oh yeah, so that was a lie. What are you gonna do about it, right? And the people is like, okay, right, well, now you're not lying, right? No. No.
Yeah, dietary guidelines. They're notorious for that. They're like, this will kill you. And then 30 years later, we find out that the guy selling the other thing paid for that science. It was like, oh yeah, no, it's actually, butter will kill you. It's like, butter will kill you, so you have to consume margarine. Dumbest idea ever. No, absolutely the opposite. And we look at who paid for all the science that said that, and it's like, oh yeah, guy's selling margarine. Duh. Super profitable. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, 100%. It's unfortunate.
Yeah, well, you do it to yourself because you have the option to opt out. You can, in our country, you can unplug from all that shit. That's what I did. I started when I bought land initially, it was to bug out, because I started going down all these wormholes, all this crazy conspiracy, and then like mass amounts of it was turning out to be true, or conspiracies that I dug through it like as a teenager, pre 2009 financial collapse, and then starting to look at everything post 2009 financial collapse. And that was right about when we were starting to learn, starting to really question 9/11 and our motives in the Middle East, and just the compounding lies from our government led me to a place where I couldn't believe anything that they said. Is part of why I dropped out of college and bugged out, because I said, dude, look, the only thing I can fix is myself. I can't fix any of this other crazy shit. I can't believe or trust any of it. So the only way that I can have control of any part of my life is by living out in the woods and being a hobbit and growing all my own food. Now I've evolved from that a little bit. I realize I don't want to do that alone. I want community around me. So we do a lot of outreach and educational stuff to try to get other people to do the same thing, so that they can find the same kind of freedom. And then again, like I said, if in a few generations enough of us have done this, hopefully we can collectively opt away some of our government. That'd be cool.
Yeah, I love everything you're saying, man. Like, it's just, everything is resonating with what we believe, what we want. But I think we've had a good setting of the stage just with this introduction. But why don't you tell us a bit about your story? You were saying you quit college because you were like waking up to the lies, so you decided to take the means of food like within your means. And then sort of like you've evolved from that, and then I also know like you're involved in many other things. Like you're involved in like the cannabis industry. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about like what it is you do, just so people can get a sense of what kind of the legend that Future 4200 is.
Yeah. So 2011, I dropped out of college to pursue my career in cannabis. That was really successful. So 2012, my business partner and I purchased 20 acres out here on the southern coast of Washington. We spent like a year and a half touring other permaculture farms kind of all over the country, and then spent a lot of time looking at different properties to purchase, and settled on land out here because of the amount of rain and the forest and the lack of people. Also, the leniency of the county government was big. They're super broke, so they can't really afford to enforce a lot of the stupid rules that they have, which is great. And the communities are all that, like, the population density out here is minimal, and it's all congregated in these two little cities right here, towns effectively. I think there's like 6,000 people tops, and it's like that's the primary population of the county. And so not only are they super lax, but you can befriend like your local government people, and they're all just homies, and like it's just a job for the vast majority of them, and they're just normal humans. So you befriend them, they leave you alone. It's great. And like I said, it was originally a bug out. We always had permaculture based agriculture design in mind. So right off the bat, we came at the property with bulldozers, excavators, chainsaws, put broad scale earthworks, ponds, terraces, swales, interconnected, planted out food forests, put up elk fencing. So we're like 10 years into development on that property. We've got a couple structures that we've put up for hosting events. We built a big amphitheater. We're right in the process of building a bunch of glamp sites. We've been doing events and just having people camp or like RV camp, but quite a few people are like, hey, if you had a nice little rustic cabin, I'd pay $150 a night to stay here instead of down at the hotel in town. I was like, oh yeah, absolutely. So we're building a couple of those. About 2016, we bought the neighbor 20 acres. Same thing, just expansion on the initial. 2018, my domestic partner and I bought the property I'm on right now. It's another 10 acres. It's on the river, just on the other side of town. And I built a house here. So I'm in the unfinished master bathroom right now, my impromptu studio. And then we leased another 100 acres just outside of town where we raise cattle. And then we've done the whole gamut of animals. We've taken a liking to like chickens and ducks and pigs and cows. This is kind of the easy animals I found. That's not true. Pigs are not easy, but they can be if your systems are established. So we use pigs, and we had a lot of pigs and used them for establishment. Like when you're trying to go from native, or let's just say like intermediate growth forest, because not necessarily native, but it's like small trees, really dense underbrush. Maybe we have a lot of blackberries here. Thick shrub. Pigs will destroy that quickly, and so at least all the undergrowth, and you can come back in and clear out, and then they're putting nutrients back down into the soil, and you get bacon out of it. So that's cool. But if you want them to like pulse through a food forest and not just destroy it, that food forest has to be super productive. So we're in this kind of like pause while some of these food forests are getting up into maturity that I can then put pigs back in without them just wrecking everything. Because the goal is to have enough food being produced by all the plants in there that they're not inclined to destroy everything. And that goes the same for cows. Like if you ever see cows standing around in a bunch of mud, that's just poor management. Cows hate standing around in mud. They'd much rather be laying down in grass, chewing their cud. And if you manage them effectively, there's no reason they should ever be standing in mud. And that's the same for pigs. unless you're using the pigs or the cows to intentionally like over impact an area that needs massive improvement. So like, the desert is an okay example if it's like a rainstorm, but it's not perfect because it's not going to make mud, but you can over impact cattle on a specific area and then move them away for a period of time. And that over impact stimulates the restart. So you can take them and you can take cows, put them out in the middle of, on the edge of like a true sandy desert, like right where it splits from scrub desert to just sand and no plants, and have them put a bunch of impact on a small area and then take them out, and grass, clover will start growing in that spot from their excrement that they've stomped down into the sands and the seeds that are dormant in the sand. Jeff Lawton did a video series called Greening the Desert that's kind of touches on this. And then in China, they did this huge project called It's at the Lowest Plateau, and it's just massive scale regreening of deserts, and they use animals on the edges to do this. It's Alan Savory's big. He's got probably 100 different projects in Africa right now where they're doing exactly that. Basically controlled overgrazing of livestock. And it's like time sensitive overgrazing. So it's not like you just left them there to overgraze in perpetuity. They're overgrazing and then leaving and they don't come back. That's the key. The rest period is the key. Well, it's both. It's the impact and the rest. So anyways, we've got cattle, lots of them. Well, not lots, about 10 right now. We've had 20. They multiply, all sorts of factors in there. My lease is up on that 100 acres, and I think I'm actually going to let it go. I was considering keeping it as a place to keep bulls, but it's like 15 minutes away from me now because the house is a little further away than we used to be from that spot. So I've got about 15 acres that we graze here, and then I'm going to pick up another probably 40 just down the road that I can walk the cattle down the road to. So, and the leasing of the land for the cattle was really nice. That's the move probably for the majority of people that are interested in having cattle, is not buying land, it's leasing land. And you can find leases for dirt cheap. I didn't believe this. I read Greg Judy's book, No Risk Ranching, and he was talking about all these leases that he has leases that people pay him to be there, and he uses other people's cows who pay him to fatten up his cows, and the other people are paying them basically to mow the yard, and he takes other people's cows and put them on other people's property and gets paid by madness. And I was like, this is nuts. And I put up some posters, and I found this old guy, and I couldn't find as good a deal as it. There's very little pasture where I am, but I found one old guy, $1,000 a year for that 100 acres was my lease. That's pretty cool. That makes way more than $1,000 worth of beef a year.
Wow.
Yeah, and those opportunities are all over.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that landowner saves like $2,500 a year in taxes when I have cows out there, and he's like in his 80s, doesn't want to do cows himself anymore. Too much work. So, those opportunities are out there for sure.
Wow.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. Pretty shocking.
Yeah.
So 100 acres for $1,000 lease a year. That's insane.
Yeah, and that includes power and water too.
Oh
wow.
Man.
Yeah. Granted, I just have an electric fence that hardly uses any power. I told him, I was like, look, if I use a bunch of power, I'll pay you for the power. But he's like, don't worry about the, $20 a year in power you use or whatever.
Wow, that is incredible. Wow.
Yeah. So, a lot of people are like, oh, you're an elitist. Not everybody can raise cattle. I'm like, well, first of all, not everybody has to raise cattle. But also, if you actually cared enough, you could probably raise cattle too. Like I bet, I think most people, that's not, a lot of people live in much better locations to find pasture to raise cattle than I do. Like 98% of my county is commercially owned timber. So there's hardly any pasture here. If you're not on the coast, I guarantee you can find more pasture than me for cheaper. If you're on the coast, things start getting, and if you're like within 5 miles of a city center, like if you're in inner city Detroit, good luck. Although I spent a lot of time in Puerto Rico, and they be raising cows there on empty lots. Like be like downtown, and there's an empty little grass lot, and there's a cow tied to a stake just eating in a circle. So, it's possible. I bet you El Salvador is like that too, huh? Like goats tied to stakes or cows tied to stakes. Yeah, for sure. Why wouldn't you? And chickens running around all the people are like, oh, you're an elitist, you own chickens. I'm like, have you never left the country? Every other, like you said, underdeveloped, there's chickens everywhere. What are you talking about? Like, chickens are a poor people's staple. It's just Americans.
Man. Once you drive away from the city, I mean, not that far away, but like you'll see like people just like herding their cattle like on the roads, man. And sometimes you'll just have to like wait for them to, move them across the street. Goats, sheep, and they're only being fed pasture, man. Like, I mean, these people, they can't afford feed.
Right. People are nuts. Like, oh, it's so expensive to raise chickens. I'm like, what the hell are you doing that it's expensive to raise chickens? Nuts.
No, these people are very resourceful here. I've spoken to some, but it seems like, I just wonder how much farther they could go if they had in mind, like, the like permaculture practices, methods 100%. Where they actually like took care of the soil, because it seems to me like they're just hustling, right? They're just looking for the next patch, not really with a plan set in mind for caring for the soil.
Right. Well, and I mean, the thing is, often the less like experience and education you have, or like like conventional formal education you have, the more intuitive it gets. Humans naturally aren't stupid. We can look at pasture and say, okay, my cows eat grass, and if I leave them here too long, there's no more grass and they have no more food. So then we have to leave. And then, hey, look, the grass grew back. And then if you can watch that over a couple cycles, you can tell the less I let the cow eat down of the grass, like the less grass it eats, the faster it grows back. Like if I only let it eat 1/3, then next time I come, it's this long. If I let it eat 2/3, next time I come, it's like maybe this long. If I let it eat all the way to the ground, next time I come, it might not have started regrowing, right? So I should only let them eat for a little bit now when I come. And then if I do that every time and I stop the grass from going to seed, and if you look into it like at a deeper level, it's like 75 or 80% of the nutrients of the grass is in the top third of the leaf blade. It's the apical tip. And the longer the grass, the more solar energy it can collect from the sun. And then the longer the roots grow and the faster this whole process gets. And that's right there how cows, it's one of the primary ways cows sequester carbon or can, is through the root growth of the grass, which is fertilized by their shit, which has some carbon in it too. That's the secondary way, is their cow pies are full of carbon. But the primary way is through the root development of the pasture crops, through their effective grazing and fertilization. And so most of these systems are, like I said, it's identifying successful natural systems, and includes systems that like humans have refined over long periods of time, because we're of nature. To say humans are unreal doesn't make any sense. But we look at like before the massive population boom of the bison, back when it was more stable, before the mass death of the Native Americans, which then enabled the mass population boom of the bison, that system was very sustainable, because you had this kind of like three-way between the humans and the wolves and the bison, and then add in all the other little animals and big animals. But just those three keystone species were in a very harmonic system, where the bison knew that there was wolves and people out there that might fuck them up. And so they would herd together, and they'd have that. Remember, we talked about like super intense overgrazing basically for a short period of time. When bisons get, or cows, any kind of herd animals get threatened by predators, humans or otherwise, they bunch together to protect the young ones and the weak ones, and the bulls and the alpha animals get on the outside to create a protect. And it's chaos. They're all bunched together, they're moving around, they're pooping in fear, and then any chance they get, they all run away from that area. They have a fear of that area, and there's so much poop that they, like, cows won't eat the grass even though it grows at a premium right on the cow patty. If you come back to it, they'll wait a couple times until the patty's dispersed. Same with the bison. Like, so now they've given that area rest. Like management grazing, which a lot of it comes from Alan Savory's work with the elephants in Africa, comes from identifying this exact situation where in the wild, when they came to the Midwest and they're like, oh, there's 16 feet of topsoil. It's because of those systems, because of thousands of years that we know of, probably longer, probably tens of thousands of years, or who knows, maybe even longer, of natives, bison and wolves doing exactly that. And they have like verbal history of like several thousand, 5,000, maybe 10, probably right up to the Younger Dryas period. So 13,000 years of them doing basically the same thing out there. That's a long time to grow topsoil. And so if you can just replicate those systems, now we don't have the wolves, which is, it's kind of a problem. Cattle act and bison act differently when they're managed by both humans and wolves. Now, I bet if I rode around, like if they kind of lived on their own out in big rangeland, and every now and then I showed up on a horse and was like, ah, la, la, and shot them, they'd be different. Because right now we're friends, right? Like they don't do that bunching thing. So my management's different. But if I was out grazing, I'd want wolves, a little bit of wolf pressure, and I'd want to like show up and hunt them basically. That's a more natural system for these animals. They evolve to, and not just them, but the grassland around them. It all evolved together to optimize for that system. So that'd be cool if you could replicate that. You need like large area, though, is the problem. I bet you could do it at a small scale with like, probably maybe like rabbits and like foxes or something, like 100 acres wheat. Just show up every now and like Godzilla hunt them.
It's an interesting concept. It's like raising rabbits for meat with using that using foxes to move them around.
Yeah, it's just like it's like basically the plains, but on a scale version.
Yeah, raising rabbits in large herds.
I'd like to raise rabbits, not in cages. We did rabbits for a little bit in cages, and I just didn't like the cage. I want to do them out, but they're destructive. Like, go look at Australia, and it's not ethical. And we have a little bit of wild rabbits here, but it's just not. It's like, it'd be like trying to do it with pigs and being loosey-goosey with pigs, and all of a sudden pigs are out. Like, that's a quick way to decimate like an ecosystem, is to let some of these little animals, like to overbreed them and then be irresponsible with your practices. You can fuck things up.
Yeah, and that's because they just reproduce at such a rapid rate, right? Or
and eat everything. Yeah.
They just, oh, okay.
Yeah. That's both. It's both. Pigs and rabbits, the same thing. They can, like, a pig can have a litter of like up to 16, some of the breeds. It's insane. And each one of those animals can have another litter like in like 8 months or something, where cows have like one, maybe two, almost always one, and it takes a while before that one can reproduce. Like, much different reproduction cycles. Yeah, and rabbits are the same. I think rabbits, I think it's about the same amount of time where a rabbit can reproduce and have the same amount. Birds are not a whole lot different. Like a chicken, you imagine a chicken can start laying eggs at like 6 to 8 months, and it lays an egg every single day, and those are fertile, and you get crazy quick.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. So you said before, when you were telling your story, you started by leasing. You purchased 20 acres of land, then you got like another 20, then you got like another 10. So were those original pieces of land, was that for like a cannabis business, or did you right from the start set out to start growing your own food and like raising your livestock? Was that always your intention? Yeah,
the land was like a bug out, and it was like our retirement plan / bug out. It's like, if I buy land, if I have this land, I like at any point I could then retire, because it's, at the time, like when we bought it, the guy that owned it, he financed that first property, and so we put 10 grand down, and then we paid $420 a month for like 7 years, little balloon payment at the end. But I figured $420, no matter what, I could go get a minimum wage job and cover that, and then in 7 years I'll have this land that's paid off. And as long as I can cover the taxes, which we play a bunch of games, so our property taxes are really cheap here for those properties, and so it's basically like, everything could go wrong, and I've stockpiled enough like hard asset to cover the taxes for like at least a generation was my goal. So definitely for the rest of my life, our taxes, based on all things being normal and like people still valuing the couple assets that I put away to cover the taxes, it's like a forever. So everything else could go horribly wrong, and I'd always have that property where I could like bug out to, right? That's kind of my goal. So we achieved that. And then the 20 acres next to it was an addition to but we bought the 20 acres next to it once we had already realized that this was going to expand into kind of like a glamping educational center, place where we could teach people about growing food and bugging out and being an anarchist and all the fun stuff. And then this property that I bought where I built the house is actually the first property I leased to raise cattle. The backyard here, the back pasture is about 4 acres, and right next to it, the neighbors is about 10 acres, and they're absentee. Nobody's heard from them in like a decade, so I grazed their property as well. It's actually where my cows are right now. And we leased this property for a year, and then I went and took Greg Judy's class in Missouri, and then came back and put up a bunch of flyers. And like 3 or 4 months later, that's when that other landowner with the 100 acres found us. And then we bought this property, again, owner financed from them in 2018. And I built the house in 2020. My cannabis businesses are all, since about 2016, have all been ancillary. So I don't grow cannabis or sell cannabis or extract or anything like that. I run a bunch of businesses that service those industries, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Wow. So you only started raising the livestock in, was that, you said 2018?
The cattle, yeah, we started.
Cattle, yeah.
That's when I bought. No, so we started raising cattle in 2016. 2016, I started. That's when I read Greg Judy's book, No Risk Ranching. Went out, found a lease. Started with 3 animals on the 4 acres. Quickly butchered 1 and raised 2 for the next like 10 months. Just I'd never raised cattle. I'd done pigs before that, and I didn't, like, just to back up a little bit. Before I bought the property, I had no experience like animals at all, raising animals, other than like we had a dog and a cat growing up. We grew up in the suburbs. And I like gardening hardly. Like I started growing some tomatoes in college because I had started getting interested, and then started growing some weed then too. That was my experience with gardening. I didn't have any idea on like any of this stuff. So it was all self-taught, and I read the books and then searched out the people that wrote the books and took their classes or caught them at seminars and listened to them talk and went from there. Toured their farms eventually. And so when we got cattle, I had no idea what I was doing. So I started with the 2 just to kind of get used to being around big animals. And if something goes wrong with 2 animals, it's a lot better than if something goes wrong with 10. Cows aren't like exceptionally cheap to buy. So I wanted to kind of get used to it for a while. And then when we scaled up, we went out and bought a bunch more. That's actually, we'd started with some Solaire, which are a bigger breed. And then when we leased the other property, we purchased 3 cow-calf pairs of Dexter, which are the little miniature ones. And then I bought a couple Angus heifers and an Angus bull. And one of the cow-calf pairs was a bull as well. So a Dexter bull and a medium Angus bull. And the Angus bull bred all across, like all of them. So then I had a bunch of like Solaire Angus and Dexter Angus. I call that Dangus cross. And then the little Dexter bull grew up just barely enough to impregnate a bunch of the other ones. And then he started going lame. He hurt his leg. So I'm currently just finishing up eating him. And I've got another Dexter bull. He's a Dangus bull, I think. They're all mutts now. It's hard to keep track. Like they're various sizes. I know which ones are definitely mostly Dexter because they're really short. And I have one that's mostly Solaire. She's really big. And all the other ones are kind of like a weird mutt in between, which is great. They're like a super healthy, happy herd, low maintenance, which is our goal with the animals.
Dangus is Dexter and Angus.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yep. And it finishes really well in the pasture, which is a big, it was something that we needed.
So all these different breeds, they treat the pasture differently?
In a sense, yes, because the big ones apply much more pressure. Think about like their hooves aren't proportionally that much bigger compared to the weight of the animal versus a Dexter. The Dexter hoof is roughly the same as a Solaire, but the Dexter animal could weigh 500-600 pounds less, maybe even 1,000 pounds less in some cases. A Solaire is on the far end of the extreme. It's like it's a French breed from like the French Mastiff, and they used them for meat, milk, but also to work. So they're like they use them, they put harnesses on them and have them plow. Like oxen would be, a Solaire would be a breed they would call oxen, which is usually a steer. I guess if you had really big balls, you'd have a bull, but typically you're using a steer for oxen. And so, I mean, it's a big, full frame, big body animal compared to Dexter. Is like my Dexter bull, barely my choice one, the one that went lame. He was my good genetics. He maybe came up to about my waist at his shoulders. Like he was just stout. It's crazy. So that little animal applies much less pressure. So the management of them is a little differently. But what's more important is how they finish, just like taste wise and intermuscular fat. And that's a very much a breed dependent thing. All other things, similar. And we don't feed the animals anything but the pasture that they live on. They get free choice to like a little trailer that's got a bunch of dividers in it, and it's got individual and a couple blends of like minerals that they potentially could be deficient in. But we don't, and what it is if the field is deficient in specific minerals, they're really good at eating that mineral, and then when they eat that mineral, they piss 90% of it back out. So you can like selectively remineralize a field with no technology involved at all. Even just giving them a salt lick, they'll piss most of the minerals in the salt lick back out on the field, and then you don't have to continue to supplement them because it's just trace minerals typically.
Yeah. So over time, your supplement use of these minerals would go down.
Right. We could find a status eventually. Yeah. And you're right. It would go down to maybe where I'm only like, ideally I'm just giving them those at like maybe early summer when it's not raining on the thing. So the minerals aren't getting all weird from all the rain and the pasture's growing. Like it wouldn't be ideal if they're eating it all in the dead of the winter when the crop growth is really slow, because the minerals might just wash off with all the rain. So it'd be ideal if it was like early stages of the heavy growth period, which for us is like spring, early summer. And then, so if I could just give it to them then, and that was enough for them because the fields were mostly mineralized, which that's happened here. We've noticed they eat much less of the minerals than they did when we first got the spot.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty cool. Pretty crazy stuff. So you started off with 3 animals in 4 acres. How did you determine that was like, how did you determine what kind of breed you were gonna get to start with, and just like how much space you needed? Did you just like shoot for? I've heard like a general rule of thumb is just like 1 acre per animal per cow.
Yeah,
should be enough pasture for that.
I heard the same thing. And if your pasture is just super healthy, if you're in a premium climate where the grass grows year round, like I think in Puerto Rico, I could probably get away with 1 per acre because it's just that the grass grows year round there. And where I'm at, it's very temperate. So the grass technically grows year round here, but in the winter, like right now, it's much slower. I think we got a day. I think tomorrow night's supposed to be 15 degrees here Fahrenheit. So that grass is not anywhere near growing at those temperatures. But like last week, it was in the upper 40s, low 50s. The grass is growing great, but it'll stop growing. I'm sure it's not growing right now. It's too cold out, and it's going to be too cold all week. Whereas in Puerto Rico, it's growing all the time, and not just grass. When you think pasture, it's a diverse. There's a lot of diversity in the species of plants that are growing out there. It's not just grass. There's clover. There's legumes. There's vetch. There's all sorts of crazy stuff out there that they're eating. And so a lot of that only grows in the peak of the summer. So anyways, everything I heard was 1 to 1. So I said, okay, well, let's try 3 animals for 4 acres. We'll undershoot. And I already knew that I was going to have to be moving them pretty crazy, like a lot if I wanted to do this. I took the class, and the class is very specific. It's like, do the math on, the stocking density and your stocking rate, and then you can decide how if you know that you don't want them eating the grass for X amount of day, like I don't want them to eat the grass for 30 days, and I've got this many acres. How many paddocks do I need to have, and how quickly do they have to move? Where that dictates. So if I got 30 paddocks, that means they're getting 1 paddock a day, and that gives me 30 days till they get back to the first paddock, right? So I had like 60 paddocks and a bunch of these automatic bat latches, and they were moving twice a day. So they'd get a little paddock. It was kind of like over pressure for that little paddock, which is pretty much ideal. And then they're moving, and then so they're constantly on the move. It wasn't enough. Like I had to butcher one to rest because I needed to slow them down a little bit because they were encroaching. You know, it was, say I needed 60 days in the winter to get there, and I only have 30. So then I split it in half again, and then there wasn't enough for them. So now they're hungry, noticeably hungry. And when they're hungry, they start pushing on the fences. And I'm subdividing all this with single line poly. Like we're trying to do this as cheap as possible. That's kind of always the goal. What's how cheap and the least amount of work. I want this to be the most amount of output for the least amount of work and money input. And you know, with the permaculture ethics of taking care of people in the earth, and you know, I'm not abusing these animals because I'm trying to skimp. Like all things optimal, what's the least amount of work and money to make this put out? Because the underlying premise here is I like eating steak, and steak is expensive if you have to buy it. So what's the most effective way to put steak in the freezer? And so, yeah, 3 was too many. We went down to 2. It was okay. I started grazing the neighbor's property, and the problems went away. Like right now I have 7, and I think 3 of them are pregnant. So I'll have 10 here is my hope. And then, well, I have the butcher coming, or the slaughter truck coming in a month to put. I got a bull. He's got horns, so that's on the list of things to put. That'll put you pretty high up the list on next one to eat if you've got horns in our group. So he's going. So I'll have 9 through the summer, which is a great number through the summer, and I'll probably send 1 or 2 in the fall, which should bring me right back down to 7, which was 7 was great. So it's like I'd say roughly 13 acres. So we're at like half right now. So 1 animal for every 2 acres is a comfortable number. If I was going to start again, I wouldn't start more than that.
Yeah, 1 per 2 acres.
Yeah, and again, you can go more. You're gonna but you're gonna probably start having to feed. And if you're in a better climate, if you're in a warmer climate than me, it'd probably be easier to jump right in. If your pastures are healthier than this one is, you could probably jump, go a little higher. If you're willing to feed them, but I'm not. I don't like hay's expensive. It's not that defeats the whole entire purpose. It's madness. Grass should never be cut, stored, like dried, stored, and then brought back to the cows. Cows should always just eat the grass in place. And we leave part of our management is leaving enough forage on the ground to get the cows through the winter when the grass slows down. So, I mean, it's effectively hay without all the machinery and compaction and diesel use and all this. Like it, and for the environment, that's one thing, but more also just as a capitalist, like all those things cost money. There's insurance and gas and like maintenance, and you have to buy the tractor and all the equipment, and you have a place to store all this hay, and then you got to go, and then as a lazy capitalist, then you got to go out and get the hay and bring it back to the cows. It doesn't make any sense. Like it's expensive and hard work. Like I don't like the sound of either of those. So we like to let the cows do all of the work, and it's great. And yeah, the guys around me, they have more head per acre. They make significantly less money per acre than we do. Our margins are way higher because our inputs are zilch, like super minimal.
Yeah, strictly off the land.
Yeah, and it helps that because of this holistic approach we've taken, and we advertise it, and I just tell people what we're doing. They're willing to pay more for product because they realize that the animals are better taken care of.
Yeah, the grass-fed, grass-finished carries more of a premium than the grain-fed. And yeah, what you're using the grass as a feed, which grows by itself.
Yeah. And so, yeah, this can be a challenge for people that, especially if you're granddaddy and daddy, and then they're handing you down the ranch and you're going to raise cattle. It can be really difficult to shift that paradigm. But for me, coming at it from zero experience, nobody around me knew anything about it. I just looked at what's the best option and did a bunch of research and I was like, well, these guys seem, especially Greg Judy. He's like, look, man, a lot of people make this way too complicated. It doesn't have to be. And then another powerful guy, he doesn't actually do cows, he does pigs, but Mark Shepard, and he really put it in my head. He's like, yeah, maybe those. So he does the pigs, and he's like, here's a bunch of guys with all these pigs, and yeah, they make way more money on pigs a year than I do. But my per acre profit, shit, we're making like 10,000 times an acre what these guys are, because yeah, we have pigs, but they eat all these nuts that we're growing, and the nut forests now after 20 years are so established. We don't feed our pigs anything. And by the way, when you finish pigs on nuts, they're ultra premium. And then we have this whole curing side of things. And then we have the farm tours. And then we have glamping because people want to come and see these pigs. And we teach classes here. And he got it all incorporated. And he started doing the math. And he's like, look, here's how I make $10,000 an acre more, or 10,000 times an acre more than these pig farmers over here. Because we're not pig farmers. Pigs are just one integrated part. So, and the same thing goes for cows. So you had brought up silvopasture, but that's really like the optimal system where you've got rows of trees and then cattle. Your pastures are strips between those trees that the cattle are grazing, and you can mob graze like cattle. It's nice to mix a bunch of animals together and mob graze them all together. There's all sorts of benefits to that because cows are hyper specific to what they should be eating, what they're adapted to eat, and that's pasture crops, which is why like corn isn't necessarily the worst thing, although it's not ideal. Like grass seed is not ideal cattle feed, but it is something that they sometimes will eat. And what's tricky about that is sometimes is if you've starved them, they'll eat it because they're just really hungry. It's the last thing they'll chew. Like you put them out in a pasture, they're not going out to eat the seeded tops of the grass. It's the nutrient level. Once the grass goes from that apical tip we were talking about earlier to seed, completely falls off because the grass dedicates all of its energy into developing the seed, and the seed is developed not for like growth, it's for like storage. So it starts changing its composition. A cow is highly optimized to eat those growth tips of the grass and like clover and vetch, that apical tip. Now sheep, goats, they're really good at eating all that other random weird stuff, and they'll browse. Like cows do not like to eat broadleaf crops, although they will if they're super hungry, but they choose not to if given the option. Sheep and goats will go straight for it. They love to browse those types of crops. And then you mix pigs in, and they'll come in and dig stuff up and disturb and also graze like nuts and fruits and berries and such. And then you toss in birds on top of that, chickens. And the real beauty of the chickens is that they love bugs. Specifically, they'll disturb all like the cow patties and the droppings, and they'll disrupt parasite and fly cycles, which often are part of the cycle of those pests. Is a like larval stage that lives in the feces. And so the chickens are really keen to that, and they like to eat the larva out of the feces, and they spread the feces out. So the composting and the fertilization cycle is ramped up. So mob grazing all those animals together in like a food forest silvopasture system, that's Mark Shepard's style. He went out and bought a bunch of old cornfields and turned it into a broad scale food forest, like silvopasture based food forest. And that's one of the best examples I've ever seen. It's epic there.
Wow, it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, but then in that scenario, you're looking at someone who's like actively setting out to, just manage this all day. Because I just imagine that is like significant amount of effort more than what you're trying to do with your setup.
No, definitely not. This guy spends most of his time like out at trade shows talking to people about how great his life is because of these systems that he established that are so low maintenance. And that's the thing. Like, what do you got to do with you don't need to go out there and tell them to eat. They got that figured out. So as long as you got your fencing right, and his silvopasture rows are it's not just trees, right? It's like full from the roots to the top of the tree. It's all productive plants that have a purpose for being there. And they basically make hedges. So you think European hedgerows, those are because hedgerows existed because barbed wire wasn't a thing and fencing was expensive, but it was super cheap to grow big thickets. And then the animals won't go through the thickets as long as the grass is good enough. They're not going to try to get through all this shit. It's like, why would I? All the food's right here. I can't see anything on the other side. I'm not going to go through your crazy thicket. So basically you can grow out productive hedgerows. That becomes your fencing, and your management maybe just moving these mobs of animals once a day. Well, you get an intern for that if you're at that scale, and he goes out in the morning, opens the gate, they move over to the other side. You don't have to force them to move over. They know, like they learn that every time you open the gate, fresh pasture, they run, they sprint, get out of the way. That's easy. That literally can be the extent of it. And especially if you can integrate ponds into these systems so that you've got water at each one of these little row pastures, good to go. Now it's easy.
Wow. You're making it sound like so easy.
It is. Identify successful natural patterns and replicate them. For me, it's the elk. Nobody maintains the elk other than the Fish and Game deciding how many of them we can shoot. These things are giant, meat-filled, forest horses that live their entire life on their own, eating out in the woods, and they show up in my backyard every now and then, and I eat them. The elk has given me pause to raising cattle. I'm like, what? I don't put that much work into my cows, but I put in like relative to the amount of work I put into the exponentially more work into the cattle. Like I got to go out and move them every now and then and make sure their water's good and shit, and befriend them so they don't just like run away from me and knock over fences every time I'm there. The elk, I don't care about them the majority of the year, and then one day on hunting season, the big bulls in the backyard, and I shoot them. That's the extent of it, and I get a ridiculous amount of meat off of it. So look at those systems. And those elk live up in these forests, which are so poorly managed because it's all for commercial timber. If the forest, like I like to think with the natives in my specific climate, it must have been so awesomely abundant, like 1,000 years ago before European contact here, where they had massive herds of elk and deer and berries, and they were cultivating the whole entire coastline. And, natives, wherever they were on this continent and most continents, were cultivating. They were like a agrarian, right? They were hunter-gatherer, but we give that a very I just made a funny connection. I was listening to a podcast, and they're like, how could hunter-gatherers possibly have built the epic, like these temples that we can't really explain, or these pyramids that we can't really explain, because traditional history tells us that all humans were hunter-gatherer, but the timeline for when they built these giant pyramids doesn't line up, because in our minds, hunter-gatherer is like this primitive society. But maybe hunter-gatherer, you've hit this peak human agrarian existence where you've got everything around you designed so optimally that it's easy as shit to be a hunter-gatherer. The hunt comes to you, and the gatherings in your backyard, you have all the time in the world to have advanced, physics, or building pyramids, or, sitting around and building community, because the food is so abundant. I think maybe we were just like strict hunter-gatherer, but we were just so agrarian that it was just abundant. It's fun.
Yeah. I mean, like, I think you raised an excellent point, right? Because we look at, it looks like we're pretty much confused about how to optimally raise cattle, but you're saying, hey, I mean, it doesn't take rocket science. Look at nature and just repeat that pattern. You have elk, they're fine, and they're feeding off the forest.
Yeah. You have bison. They lived on the plains. Nobody's feeding bison hay in the winter. People are like, oh, my cows, I have to feed hay because it snows here. It's like, oh, okay, well, bison lived in the snow. Like, go north. There's like yaks up in northern Canada that live out there, and they're in the snow like most of the year, doing just fine. What do you mean? There's somebody out there feeding them hay? Is that how wild yaks survive? I learned at Greg Judy's class. There's a guy from Africa, I think Ian McGines is his name, and he teaches these crazy guys out in the bush how to holistically manage cattle. And they're like, there's no fencing, these guys live with their cows, and they have like a stick, and the cows they're part of the herd, and they're like the leader of the herd, so they're out there like mob grazing, regreening desert. But somebody asked about water. He's like, where do they get the water? And he's like, well, first of all, your American cows are weak and frail. Like, you have just soft cows. Like, your cows suck. He's like, the cows in Africa, they spend one day eating, they spend one day walking to the water hole, and they spend one day walking back to the food. It's like this 3-day loop. And the guys with the sticks, they lead this around. He's like, your cows are just soft. Like, your cows suck. He's like, it wouldn't take very many generations for your cows to be hard again. He's like, you worry too much about water.
Man, that is so interesting, man.
But to be clear, you need to give your cows. You don't need to give your cows. You need to give your cows water. And there's an optimal rate where if you go below optimal, they start putting on weight much slower. And it's like, yeah, they survive, they're fine, but they're going to give you way less milk if that's your goal, and it's going to take them a lot longer to get to weight if that's your goal. So if you have the ability, definitely give them unlimited access to water.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's really shocking though. That the cows in Africa, they will literally spend like doing these 3-day loops. One day of just traveling, one day of water, one day of feeding. It's really, I mean, like, put that into perspective, right? I mean, people want to complain about how the cattle are treated in America. Like, they're just like quite literally spoiled. They're literally like they're your average American. They're just like fat and untrained.
Yeah, life's hard for all other animals. And like the cattle, that's the same life for all of the animals in Africa, right? And not all of Africa, but when we're talking about like the desertified, the safari areas of it, where it's not like jungle, all the animals kind of revolve around the watering hole. They all go out, eat, come back to the watering holes. That's just part of life there. Now, with this current like state, who knows what it was like 10,000 years ago.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's another like very interesting topic about, you optimize the food system. Now you have so much free time.
Right.
I'm very positive we figured that out thousands of years ago or X amount of years ago. And then somehow something happened. We lost that knowledge or we disconnected ourselves. I mean, you could travel 100 years back and then you could probably see systems that were more effective than they are today. Well, I mean, just food, for example, right? We didn't demonize animal foods before the 60s. Now we demonize it and now we're getting sick. So something happened there, definitely. Too much food abundance was not good for, for the elite, you could say.
Yeah, better living through chemistry was actually a lie.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I wonder if how that, just like trying to grow these massive crop fields played into it. Kind of like people started trying to grow massive crop fields of grain. I suppose,
Well, the birth of agriculture falls right in line with the Unger Dryas. You guys know about? You heard Graham Hancock, Randall Carlson talk about that at all?
Yeah.
The
Great
so
Reset.
It seems likely that like most humans just died, and the ones that survived lived through like several generations of traumatic survival, and we just lost all this information that we had. And wouldn't take if you think about it right now, how many generations, like if we went one generation where like electricity fell apart, we could lose so much information so quickly and just be fucked, like right back to borderline primitive. Wouldn't take much, especially probably we're at one of the most frail stages of humanity for that to happen at all time, because there's like the most amount of people with the least amount of knowledge and the greatest amount of access to knowledge. It's so insane. We live in such a weird paradigm right now. Like you have the ability to know everything, and yet most people know nothing.
Yeah, we have the Great Library of Alexandria, right? Just a search away, and
in your
people
pocket.
Obviously doesn't get taken advantage of. And the biggest weakness is you just delete everything digital, and then what are you left with? I don't know, nothing probably. Just hard books.
Most people nothing. I got a pretty good like hard copy of Wikipedia going.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like my digital copy. I have a redundant digital backup that I kind of update every 6 months or so, and then like there is kind of like this key article library guide that I've kind of been working on, like a hard copy of. Like there's just some things that are so crucially important that makes a lot of sense. Like a lot of things around firearms, a lot of things around like physics, a bunch of stuff around like plant sciences, stuff that's like could be so valuable if shit hit the fan, and would be lost forever if nobody had any copies of this. Like just little things, like hard copies of all the science around how to render pigs into fuel. That, like, if shit hit the fan, if the fuel infrastructure fell apart, that'd be you want to talk about getting in on those early days of super lucrative, petroleum. That's right there. That would be, if you're the guy that's got gas or shut down. And again, you can grow these pigs for super cheap and easy on your nut force.
Yeah. Raise pigs for fuel. Wow.
Yeah, it's actually biofuel from pig fat is actually pretty viable.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a really quick conversion of sunlight energy into like petroleum derivative, which, you think about petroleum, it's mostly plant derived, so it's not that far off. Just speed the process up.
Yeah, I mean, we use fat to fuel ourselves. I'm sure we can leverage fat to fuel, as biofuel.
Yeah, 100%. You can, and that's what biofuel is. Fats that have been converted.
Yeah, but that thought of like documenting or kind of creating a permanent library of knowledge, has crossed my mind. Something that has to be waterproof, fireproof, just cataclysmic proof, right?
Maybe like etch it into
Because
stone somewhere.
well, I mean, maybe that's why they built the pyramid and then stored information inside it, and
Yep.
then whoever got to
Exactly.
it first has the knowledge.
Yeah.
Um, right?
Yeah.
So, you know,
That's what they did, and they did it with picture text too. It's crazy.
pictures, yeah, yeah.
With emojis.
Yeah, with
Pic-
emojis. We're finally catching up.
we're using emojis. I mean, yeah, obviously, pictures. You don't need to understand language. You just can look at a picture,
Right.
right? It's pretty cool.
Dustin, how are you doing on time? I just want to make sure we're respectful
yeah.
of your time. You're busy because I mean we have many questions.
Yeah, I should probably. I got dinner. I gotta go down and get dinner going here pretty soon. But we could go another like 10, 15 minutes.
All right, awesome. So in your current setup, so I think you mentioned at some point you had like up to 20 cattle, but then you downsized.
Yeah.
Was there any particular reason for that? Just like less effort?
Yeah, it's just kind of a
downsizing,
natural, natural process of eating them and selling them, and then kind of like in working towards getting the ideal herd that I want. So problem animals got rid of. I would have had 11 right now, or 9 instead of my 7, but I had one die in like birth last year. Died during birth, and it was unfortunate because it like ran and jumped over one of my back fences at the property I was leasing, which just led into like thousands of acre of timber. And every now and then I'd let them back and they'd go graze in the forest and come back. But she jumped over the back fence. So I could find her. And then like a week went by and I saw buzzards and I was like, oh yeah. So I went and I followed the buzzards and she was like half mile away by a tree, dead with a dead baby, like, and then like starting to decompose and the buzzards were eating. I was like, oh, this sucks. I mean, so it's like, I don't know if there's even anything I could have done. Who knows?
That's devastating.
So yeah, things, shit happens. And just culling down. So that's kind of where we're at with it right now, but we're actively increasing the numbers, and I'll watch these pastures that I have them on now and see if I can increase. And I've got, like I said, the neighbor down the road for another 40 something acres. It's just on me to get the perimeter fencing up. And I just have a bunch of other projects that I'm working on right now. So here in the next year or two, we'll expand out we'll start doing a bit more for sure. There's quite a few properties along the road that I'm on now that are just vacant, bunch of grass, nobody's doing anything with. So I'll just hunt down the owners and figure out how I can get cows on it.
Yeah. So why don't you tell us a bit about your other projects that you have going on? I mean, what's like next for you, man? Like, are you looking to just like keep doing like the raising animals for food kind of thing, and just like working the land?
Yeah,
maybe work that up to a business, sell meat.
No. We have parties. I don't really sell meat anymore. We just like feed our friends and families and throw big barbecues and do like community barbecues. And whenever we have like kids' birthday party or whatever, we blow it out and feed everybody burgers and stuff. We host a bunch of events up on the property, and I'll feed people the beef then too. It's kind of like selling. They buy a ticket to come to the event and then get free beef, which is it's iffy with the USDA or the like food handlers, but it doesn't matter.
Well, you're not selling the beef, so
yeah, exactly. Or you join you're in my club, you get free beef. Like there's all sorts of dumb little workarounds. One here, I can sell you a live animal perfectly legally. No restrictions, whatever. I can tell you the price you pay, and that's that. Government doesn't care about it. Other than I'm supposed to report income on that. But and then you can do whatever the fuck you want with that cow, including if I let you could harvest the cow right here on the field, cut it up, quarter it, take it home. And so I got a neighbor guy, he raises 200 head, and he said it's exclusively Asian and Mexican families, and he sells like 10, 15 a year, and they just come out, and that's what they do right there in the field. They come as like a big family, and they harvest a bunch of them and cut them up and put them in coolers and take them home, which is sweet. That's 100% legal. It's awesome. It's their cow.
Wait, Can you do that in the same day though? Don't you need to like hang it for like a few days or something like that?
They cut it, they quarter it.
Yeah.
No, you're right. If you're going to take it to ground beef, it doesn't matter at all. If you want to make steaks, you should definitely hang it. I like a 2 to 3 week hang. You can hang quarters. That's typically what they, some places will hang a half, but if you're trying to do it at home with your fridges or you got converted like chest coolers, you're probably hanging a quarter because it'll actually it won't drag on the ground, and that's just fine. You could cut it all the way down to your steaks and age all of your shit at in cut down form. Some super high end spots do that. They take typically though, like if you see like a long dry aged steak, it came off of a quarter or a half that had aged for a couple weeks prior. But you could just cut it steak and age it from that. You other than maybe like the tenderloin and backstrap, the rest of it is better if it hangs. And like the organ meat doesn't matter. Like the tongue, I've never had an aged tongue, although might be good. But you're not aging liver or anything like that. So it's just those muscles, they break down over time and get a little more tender. So yeah, you typically want to age it a bit.
Yeah. But then in the case of the families that go out and do the harvesting like on the field, like how does that work? Do they just take ground beef?
They buy the animal while it's still alive. So be like, I sell you a cow. This is your cow. Come get it. And you come and get it. And instead of loading the live cow up into your trailer, you shoot it here and then cut it up into quarters. And then off you go with your quarters of beef. And that was perfectly legal. Whereas if I had cut it up and sold it to you, whole different ballgame, all sorts of different rules. You want to come and cut it up, go for it. I could even provide you the knives, a hose, and I could even have a spot, like a nice warm place for you to do it. Like that's all perfectly legal. Just I can't cut it up for you.
It's property, right? So whoever owns the property can do whatever they want. They can with their property.
I can let people kill their cows on my property all day long. You can't tell me that I can't do that. That's not illegal. And I can sell you all the cows that I want.
Yeah. So this is a really interesting topic because one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, like on the topic of obviously government regulation, just like overburdening the industry and making it very hard for like farmers to get their product out without having to go through the USDA processing facilities. You mentioned one example right now, but do you have any other ideas of like creative workarounds that people could do, whether it's a farmer or a consumer, to just kind of circumvent the big man?
Yeah, the trick, and some states, I think maybe like Montana just implemented this, or Wisconsin or something, or Wyoming, one of them, where the farmer can now like do it all in house and sell you steaks. Every other state, that's illegal. I cannot process a cow down to a steak and sell you a steak unless it's been USDA certified. That is not legal. I think the smallest amount that the USDA allows is a 1/8 share. And that's part of why I got into the Dexter cattle, because a 1/8 share of a small little Dexter is not that much meat, and it actually that fits in the average like California yuppies freezer, and they were willing to pay a bunch of money for that share. So that was one thing. Raise smaller cattle. Then it may not be a steak, but maybe it's only like 5 steaks or 10 steaks, and that's more reasonable. Or like a couple steaks, a couple roasts, and then 10 pounds of ground beef, which that was kind of how the share worked out. Which is much more reasonable and approachable. So maybe convincing your farmer to raise Dexter. I like them. They're pretty close to comparative. They take a little longer to get to weight, I guess, relative to like an Angus. But the Dangus do pretty good. So yeah, try to convince your farmer to grow smaller animals. And then the other one is like teaming up with a bunch of buddies and buying a live cow from a farmer and you like a lot of farmers, if you say, hey, I'm working with a local slaughter truck and I want to buy one of your animals and have them come here and slaughter it in the field, would that be okay? A lot of them will say, yeah, hell yeah, go ahead and buy it. I don't have to now put it on the trailer, take it to the livestock, and you're just going to buy it here. And you've got, like, for me, the guy's name's Arnie. He's the only one in the county. Every single rancher uses him here. They all know him. If I brought the idea up, even with one of my neighbors down the road, I was going to buy one of his bulls and have Arnie just take him from there. And he said, yeah, he ended up selling the bull for a bunch more money. But So you get a hold of that local processor, and you could probably, you know, if you had 10 people that you were working with or 10 families, then that's a pretty small cut. You're gonna save a bunch of money by doing it that way. That's so, you know, collectivize, get together with other people that you know that are interested in, hop on the Butterfield Discord and start, you know, like working with the people in your local area and team up and approach a farmer. And if you don't have any people, go do that yourself. Put some capital up, do it yourself, and then build that group. Right.
I like it.
Yeah. You just need to find someone who's willing to do like get like the processing truck, right?
Right.
Like, I mean, you need that investment.
Well, and a lot of spots that already exist. And if you don't have to do that either, you can go, and like I said, you could go out with a group. Say you got 4 people, you buy the cow alive, you pulled in on the purchase of the cow. This is all perfectly legal. The 4 of you process the cow. It's not that difficult. Because obviously the least problematic, most expensive way is to go to the grocery store and buy the steak, right? People are like, oh, I'd never process the cow. And you keep buying it from the grocery store, whatever. We're talking about other people that are trying to find workarounds. Get a group, go find a farmer that lets you buy it in the field alive and then process it. And you can take that quarter to the butcher, and the butcher can cut that into steaks for you. And you'll put a little do not sell stamp on your package when he sells it back to you and charge you $1 or whatever to $1 a pound to process it. And then there you go. Now you got steaks and ground beef and all the stuff. So you didn't have to buy all of the, like, you didn't have to have a butcher shop. You just had to have a sharp knife so that you could dispatch, you know, maybe a rifle so you could dispatch the cattle and skin it and quarter it. You can do all that. We do the elk in the field. I've done a cow. It's not that bad.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then you say when you quarter it up, you literally mean like, you know, you cut the animal in quarters and you just take like a big chunk, you wrap it in something, just take it to the butcher.
Yeah. Like, so the slaughter truck that comes, he's got a big refrigerated truck, puts a big hook in it, hangs it on like the butcher rack thing. And so it's hanging, but you could put it in a cooler. Like when dudes imagine you shot an elk out in the woods and you've got to pack it, you know, miles back to the truck and then drive back to your house. That may be hours away. So it's wrapped in like a game sack. Like that's what if I was going to do it that way, I'd go buy some game sacks from the store. Same as if you're going to go hunting. And then, then you put the quarters in the game sack and toss it in the cooler and drive it off to the butcher. Butcher will hang it for you for a couple of weeks. Now, one problem with this is the butcher is, I used to be able to call the butcher and get in like next week, 2 weeks. And then COVID came around and now the butcher's like 18-month lead time. And it's every butcher in a 150-mile radius of me right now has got about the same lead time. So I'm scheduled out like way in advance. It's terrible. I hate it. There's a massive, you want to make money in this industry, open up a butcher shop in a hurt market, because almost all of them are deficient in butchers.
Wow. Yeah, we've talked about butchering, as a business.
It's expensive. There's a lot of regulation, and it's all, you know, like you're buying a lot of stainless steel.
Yeah. Well, we need to figure out a workaround for that, right? Because
I don't know. That's a hard one. That's where the meat packers have grinded the hardest on the industry, because that's what they do, is making it very cost prohibitive to be a butcher.
Yeah, but at least we know, like, you know, you could get a group and have the farmer sell you that one cow, and then you just come process it on their field, and then boom, like, as far as everyone's concerned, that could be perfectly legal. Or I suppose, you know, if you own it with like other 4 buddies or whatever, like the group that owns that cow, you could pay to have that cow processed, like scheduled and processed at some point. Yeah. But and it doesn't necessarily have to go through like the whole USDA approval process.
No, it does not. Right? Not at all. Yeah, the USDA is required if you want to sell it out from there.
Yeah. So we're talking about like ownership of the consumer over the livestock. Right.
Yep. Yeah. You're buying a live animal, and then once it's your animal, you can do whatever you want with it.
On the hoof. Yeah.
On the hoof. Yeah. Like maybe he doesn't let you process it there, and you put it in a trailer and drive it over to somebody's rural backyard and process it there. That's legal too. You know.
Yeah.
Local municipalities may your results may vary. Like you may not be allowed to shoot a gun in your backyard, so keep that in mind.
Yeah. No, I mean, I like the sound of that. I think that this is like a potential venue that can be explored and sort of like, empower the farmers, empower the consumers, right? And start building like local supply chain networks that are literally just like based
put
off
together,
of like,
Sure. It seems like it'd probably be a valuable like website that it was just collectivizing people that I want to buy beef, but can't make that full step. Like I don't want to buy an entire cow, and I don't really want to fuck with the USDA. So I think people could save a lot of money, especially if like one guy in your group knew what was going on and could like show you the reins on processing. And again, it's not difficult. There's a million YouTube videos on it. If you figure it out, you get a sharp knife, you're pretty much good to go. Especially if you're real good, you get the farmer to let you use his tractor, because then you can put the cow up on a gimbal on its back legs and gut it and skin it hanging. Night and day difference.
Yeah. Versus like doing it like with the animal on the floor, like on its side.
Yeah, you do it on the half, and you skin half of it and process one half, and then you roll it back over you put the pelt back out and you roll it back over on the pelt and you skin the other half and process the other half. That's like if you're gonna do an elk in the field, that's how you would do it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Sorry.
It's
zero experience here. Just
it's dude, it's not like I said, I don't come from lots of experience with this either. It's just recent experience. I was involved in the first like shooting of an elk 3 years ago on this property. The only now 4 elk that I've ever shot or been involved in the processing of were all right here in the last just couple years. And again, cows is only a few, I guess 5 or 6 more years past that. But before that, we did all the pigs. Doing pigs was my first experience ever slaughtering anything.
Man, that must have been very scary doing it for the first time.
Yeah, it's definitely emotional, and it should be emotional. If it's not emotional, you like stop and take pause, and you might be a psychopath.
Psychopath, yeah,
I
psychopath
think so.
territory. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Man, my brain is like running a million ideas. I'm just, I think it's necessary, right? I'm just thinking about.
Yeah, it's like Crowd Cow, but it's if only we could have hopped on the name before they did, because it's a much better approach to Crowd Cow.
Yeah, well, that's a thing already.
Yeah, but it's a little different. It's kind of the same, but it's not about like going and buying a live cow out in the field and slaughtering it yourself. I've never seen that. I just heard about. I never even thought of that being a possibility until the dude told me that that's what he does with all of his, and I was like, oh my, this is brilliant. Yeah. So and those families are just doing it because it made the most sense. So you could definitely collectivize a group, and you could definitely build like a website that enabled people to link up to do this.
Yeah. All right, I think we can wrap this up, right? You have to go. I mean,
yeah, I gotta go do dinner.
Yeah, that's all right. No, I mean, this has been incredibly like informative and educational, man. Like, we really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to hop on again another time when I got some more time. I feel like we could go for a long time.
Yeah, man. Yeah, you're just like loaded with knowledge, and you can tell like you're passionate about this and way more beyond this topic as well. So we really appreciate that, and we definitely feel like we'd get a lot of value if we hopped on another call again.
Awesome.
But yeah, man. Thank you so much. Where can people find you and support? If you want to plug in like your business or any projects you have down the line, feel free to do so.
Yeah, I'm Future 4200 on the social medias, and there's a website that's the same name, but unless you're a cannabis processor, you're not going to have too much fun over there. I got a couple of businesses. If you go on the social, you'll see I post about them. They're all very specific and like word of mouth. We don't advertise or anything with any of them. So if you know what you're looking for, you'll find it. And if not, just hop on the socials, and I kind of keep track of this crazy life that I live, and love if you follow it along. And if you have any specific questions, feel free to reach out. I try to answer everyone. So thanks for having me, guys. And I look forward to doing this again.
Yeah, tons of fun, tons of knowledge. So thank you so much.
Yep.
All right,
Thanks a lot, man. All right. Yeah, we can wrap this up.
we'll wrap it up. And thanks everyone for watching. And really appreciate it. Like and subscribe. Go follow Future 4200 and Butterfield. We love you all and have a good night.
Good night. Peace.